Michele Dunne has moved recently, is now at the Atlantic Council's Rafik Hariri Center for the Middle East. We all know her as the Arab Reform Bulletin, and she also chairs a working group here in Washington, a bipartisan group on Egypt. Esraa Abdel Fattah is an Egyptian human rights and democracy advocate who was honored last night with an award that has the marvelous title of Middle East Visionary Award, and that she is indeed. She is now also the media director of the Egyptian Democratic Academy. Radwan Masmoudi is the founder and president of the Center for the Study of Islam and Democracy. I think of it as the Center for the Study and Practice of Islam and Democracy. He has the distinction, in addition, of having gone recently to his native Tunisia, acting as an observer initially and later as an unsuccessful candidate for parliament, which those also serve who don't succeed. And we are looking forward to hearing about that experience. Larry Diamond is a professor of both sociology and political science at Stanford University. I think of him in Washington, we think of him as the editor of the Journal of Democracy. He has contributed in 1,000 different ways to our understanding of democratic transitions throughout the world. I imagine that this panel, I'll say up front that I have enormous enthusiasm for what I guess we're calling the Arab Spring today, even if it might have started in Iran, even if it's not spring, even 1,000 other evens. I have enormous enthusiasm for it. I share the hopes for it that were evident in the first panel. But I also think that as you take a closer and closer look at things, that kind of granularity reveals a lot of issues. And this panel, I'm sure, will focus on a lot of those issues, starting with Michele Dunne.
Good morning. I have the unenviable position of standing in for Saadeddin Ibrahim, who was to be on this panel, and I wish he were here so we could get his analysis. But I've been asked to speak about the Egyptian transition. I'll do the best I can, give it to you from my point of view, and then you can get the real story from Esraa. Look, there's good news and there's bad news, I think, about the transition in Egypt. The good news is that Egypt is about to hold parliamentary elections that might well be the freest, the fairest, and the most inclusive that Egypt has ever held. Political parties have been formed. There will be judicial supervision of the elections. There is a new electoral system that reflects at least some of what Egyptians were looking for from their electoral system for a long time. But there's bad news as well about how the Egyptian transition is going. On the elections, there's a little bit of potential bad news, which is that Egypt has chosen an extraordinarily complicated electoral system. I think it's going to be really challenging for the electoral administration, even if well-intentioned, to really carry this system out successfully, and there's going to be a lot of room for misunderstanding, for problems in administration, and for violence, which unfortunately has been a feature of a lot of Egyptian elections in the past. There's a lot of scope for security problems because the police are not have not been fully reformed and are not really back out on the streets in full numbers after the revolution. So I have some concerns about how the parliamentary elections will go, but my main concern about the Egyptian transition is a much broader one. And that is because of that is the role of the military in the political system, because of the what I have called sort of Egypt's half revolution, the fact that power was turned over to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. What we see now is that the military leadership is willing to turn over legislative authority, or at least some legislative authority, to an elected parliament, but that they're delaying the transfer of executive authority. They're delaying scheduling a presidential election, I think, in order to hold on to executive authority through the writing of a new constitution. A lot of this was sort of going on with smoke and mirrors, but it all became right out on the surface in the last couple of weeks with the issuance of a super-constitutional set of principles that the Deputy Prime Minister, appointed by the SCAF, has put out. And what this would do, what it's clear, there are a number, I won't go into the details, but what the military seems to be looking for is not only preserving the extensive influence and, of course, economic perquisites that it had during the Mubarak era, but actually enhancing it quite a bit, formalizing its status and making the kind of influence that it had de facto now become de jure in the new constitution. In other words, freedom from civilian oversight, perhaps freedom from civilian appointments to the military, ability to intervene in legislative and other political processes to overrule legislation, ability to control those who will be selected for the constituent assembly that's to be chosen. And that, in fact, is supposed to be the main task of the parliament to be elected, is to choose a 100-member constituent assembly that will then oversee the writing and passage of a constitution. The super-constitutional principles put the military in control of a lot of that. And I think that's really of a great deal of concern. And a lot of Egyptians think it's of concern now. If you've been following what's been going on over the last couple of days, there are some pretty heated negotiations going on. Many of the political parties, the leading presidential candidates, have been meeting with the military and expressing strong, and meeting with the deputy prime minister, who's taking Ali Salmi is taking the lead on this, expressing strong concerns and objections, and there is this possibility of a very large demonstration tomorrow. So, look, we all know that the military is powerful in Egypt, that it has a great deal of influence, that it will continue to have a great deal of influence for a long time. And we also know from other cases around the world that real civilian oversight of the military in a case where democratization is taking place takes a long time. It's not something, even if it's in the Constitution, it doesn't happen overnight. And so I would think that if Egypt is going to move into a real process of democratization, then you will, it could take a long time. It could take a decade or more for real civilian oversight of the military and civilian control of the military to emerge. What I'm concerned about, though, is that what the military is trying to do right now is place serious obstacles to that ever happening in the new constitution. So, and that would be, I think that would be really a shame. That would be really a very unfortunate outcome of the revolution that started on January 25th. Also, I think just the continuation of rule by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces for the period of time that they're envisioning is quite problematic in itself, because what we're looking at is we're going to have parliamentary elections taking place in Egypt starting on November 28th and stretching into March. There will be the lower house, the People's Assembly, will be elected between the end of November and the beginning of January, and then after that, the Shura Council, the upper house, the parliament will be seated probably at some point in March. And then what the SCAF envisions is then Egyptians embark on the process of writing and passing a new constitution, and only at the end of that is a president elected. So that could be, it could be quite a while. To be honest with you, the process of writing a constitution should take a while. I don't think it's something that should be rushed through in a month or two. It's absolutely fine for it to take a year or two or whatever Egyptians need. But if during all of that time the military is holding on to executive authority, I predict we're going to see a lot of problems in Egypt, because after all, the military is not set up to run the country, and we can see that. We can see that very clearly, that they're not doing a good job of, I already mentioned the lack of effective police reform to restore security. We've seen the mismanagement of some very serious sectarian problems. We've seen harassment and persecution of non-governmental organizations and of some of the movements, like the April 6th youth movement that were involved in the revolution. And we're seeing the Egyptian economy, really deteriorating, partly because of all these things, because of the sense of insecurity and the sense that the political transition is hung up, that it's not happening. And I think we need to be clear about the fact that these parliamentary elections constitute a step in the political transition. They are not in themselves the political transition. I hear a lot of people talking about coalition governments coming out of the parliamentary elections. Egypt at this point is not a parliamentary system. You need the military is still going to, there's not going to be a coalition government that's going to come out of the parliament and take executive authority. It's until the Constitution is rewritten, it's still the president, and in this case the SCAF, that will be appointing governments, that will be appointing the cabinet. And so the military will still be holding executive authority until a president is elected. Just briefly on the United States, I think that the United States really can't escape a degree of responsibility for what's going on here because of its very long relationship with the Egyptian government in particular, and with the Egyptian government in general, and the Egyptian military in particular. I hear U.S. officials saying, well, we really don't have that much leverage. Who does then? I mean, it's really hard to understand in this situation of a very high level of military assistance and so forth, why the United States should not have some influence over this situation. And indeed, we saw with Secretary Clinton's speech last week, U.S. officials starting to speak up and voice some concerns about how things are going in Egypt. I've been very enthusiastic about generating various kinds of support, economic support for Egypt after its revolution, because I think it's going to be critical to support the economy so that to underpin a successful political transition. So I've been in favor of debt relief and of once again taking up the issue of free trade arrangements and thinking in pretty big terms about how we can help Egypt through this transition. But I really think that those things are only going to be possible and only going to be advisable if Egypt is in a genuine political transition, which means the full transfer of both executive as well as legislative authority to civilians, elected civilians. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michele.